Hi, welcome to the Lifestyle Herbalist, the podcast where holistic wellness meets everyday living. I'm your host, Dami Vaccaro. I'm a registered dental hygienist, a clinical herbalist, and a certified health coach.
And I'm your co-host, Sabrina Cooper, a registered dental hygienist with a bachelor's in oral health promotion, a certified culinary nutritionist and herbalist, and a mindfulness and mindful eating coach. Together, we explore the intersection of holistic health, herbal wisdom, and joyful living. From plant-powered remedies to kitchen medicine, mindful moments, and conversations that feed the soul, we're here to help you feel vibrant, grounded, and inspired in your daily life. So steep a cup of something soothing, settle in, and let's grow well together one episode at a time, bringing you a healthy dose of happiness.
Welcome back. We are really happy to have Daniel DeBaun with us today. He is an internationally recognized expert in electromagnetic radiation, EMF protection, and more than 30 years in telecommunications leadership at Bell Labs, AT&T, SAIC, and Telecordia. He is the inventor of DefenderShield and co-authored the best-selling book Radiation Nation, The Fallout of Modern Technology, and is a frequent media guest on EMF health and technology exposure. He's going to help us learn more about ways that we can protect ourselves from these toxins. Welcome, Daniel. I remember hearing about them probably a decade ago when cell phones were getting used more often and the side effects from these magnetic fields, but I haven't heard anything about them in a long time. I kind of got off of the radar. And so I'm so excited to have you on here today so that we can learn more about this potential health issue.
Definitely. Thanks so much for inviting me. I'm excited to talk about the wellness space and how it may relate to what some refer to sometimes as an environmental toxin, amongst the many other toxins we have in our environment. So I can help bring you up to date on sort of what's going on in the marketplace, maybe explain a little bit what it is and try to answer questions you may have.
Thank you. Yes, I think our audience would, and for me as well, would like to know more about what is it exactly? Where does it come from and how does it affect us?
Well, it's funny. It's been around us for 100 years. We had radios. We had in the 50s, computers started to come in. It actually started becoming more and more involved in our lives. Electronics, the refrigerators around us, all of the electronics that we have around us is emitting some form of emission. And so it basically comes in two forms. The stuff that's in your house, it's alternating current and it's extremely low frequency emissions. So when you have an electric light on and there's current running in the wall, there's emissions, electromagnetic radiation emissions coming out of the wall, but it's small. It's not very powerful, but it's there. That's the same emissions that you find in the 5,000 watt power lines that are running along the major highways. They are emitting a lot of emissions, and that historically we know a lot about. With the years of experience we have. And sometimes that was referred to as a source of leukemia, amongst other things. So you want to stay away from that because history tells us it may be a problem. So there's those kinds of electromagnetic radiation. Then there's the electromagnetic radiation we have in our cell phones, our laptops, our tablets, our routers. All of these devices that we have around us have only been around us for 10, 15 years, really. Before that, if you had a cell phone, you didn't have anybody to call, so you're not on it very much. So,
Right.
But it was transmitting power levels that were potentially dangerous to the human. But of course, there was no real evidence of that at that time. In fact, actually, the standards were created for that over 30 years ago for a cell phone transmission. And what it was based on 6-foot males, thick-headed 6-foot males And they looked at the thermal increase that would occur from the signal coming from a cell phone. Why a thermal? Well, it's a microwave. Microwave, when you put a piece of meat in a microwave oven, you push the button, and what happens? The water between the cells heat up, and it cooks your meat. Well, that's a microwave slash radio frequency signal, which is electromagnetic radiation. So when the standard was created for a 6-foot male, they talked about a penetration of 1 to 2 inches into the head, and it wouldn't heat up more than 1 to 2 degrees. Fast forward to today, that represents about 3% of the population using cell phones. All of a sudden, our kids are having, our grandchildren are having it. Women with less thick skulls, at least that's what I'm told. And so difference in the biology of the people using it, that it represents so few of us. And it never, in all the last 20, 30 years of research, really looked at the thermal. It looked at the biological. And what's happened over the years, there appears to be lots of evidence that talks about the potential impacts of the human body from exposures from these signals, and both RF and ELF, that could harm the human body. And we need to talk about it a little bit to see if it's something you need to be worried about in your life.
So what effects can happen in the human body?
So that's a wonderful question, because it's a full gamut of things that happen. And maybe I can explain a little bit more about what is electromagnetic radiation on a spectrum.
Okay.
When you have a wave in the water oscillating towards the shore, you can watch the speed of that wave every second. And let's say every second, 2 or 3 waves go by that point. Well, in a hertz, which is the way you refer to the electromagnetic radiation, 1 hertz is 1 cycle per second. When you talk about a cell phone, for example, that transmits around 1 gigahertz. That's about 1 billion cycles per second going by. So it's a lot. And then the power levels are typically, based on the standards, is 1.6 watts. It's just a number of power that lets you transmit to a cell tower. And it goes up to 5 miles. So like it's fairly strong. And so then you have you go up towards the light space, which is in close to the terahertz space, which is blue light. And your audience needs to understand blue light, because blue light can deteriorate the macula. It can influence the eye, and we'll maybe talk a little bit about next. And then if you keep on going up the speed of the electromagnetic radiation, you get to X-rays, gamma rays. And as everyone sort of knows, X-rays and gamma rays can damage the cell. What it does is it knocks the electron out of its orbit around the nucleus, and then you can get cancer, mutated cells. There's all sorts of things that happen at those levels. That's the breakdown of a cell at that speed. But when you talk about RF signal at 1 gigahertz, it's a very different breakdown of the cell, as we're understanding in science. So that gives you a little idea of the spectrum. And then once you understand that's part, what can it do to the human body? Well, there's some science that shows that they actually can cause cancer. And we have lots of scientific evidence that shows under certain circumstances, there could be a cancerous cell. But that's not what I worry about too much. What I worry about is the electric hypersensitivity, because when we started in business probably 15 years ago, roughly about 15 to 20% of the population was affected in some way by RF signal exposure. You may get a headache. Your hands may tingle a little bit. You have flu-like symptoms. You have brain fog. All of these symptoms are associated with not only other events in the environment, but also the electromagnetic radiation that is exposing. So, for example, when I know a clinician who, if he goes next to a router, he falls asleep a little bit. And it's directly influenced from that exposure because he's electric hypersensitive. Wow. And when, again, as I said, roughly 20%, 10, 15 years ago. Now there's some evidence in some science studies that show it up to 40 to 50%. That's debilitating stuff that happens to the body as a result of exposures. And when you go to a clinic, they say, take 2 aspirin, you got a headache. And they don't realize it's the router sitting next to their head that may be causing the problem.
Wow. Yeah, and I think about that along with cumulative things. So it's, it's the EMF, but then there's also all the other toxins and things that are around. So it's the cumulative. I mean, with sun exposure, X-rays, all of that. And so, right.
Absolutely. It is a toxin. And I think I referred to it early on as a toxin. It's been introduced to our environment like so many other things, like trans fats. Trans fats were introduced over 30 years ago. And there was a lone biochemist who said, wait a minute, it's not eggs that are killing us. It's the trans fats that are killing us.
Right.
So we were using trans fats to make crispy French fries, but it also caused cancer. And it took us over 30 years to figure it out.
Right.
So.
Yeah. Well, and when you were talking about the study looking at, men who are 6 foot with thick skulls, that sort of thing, then I think about like our vulnerable population, our children. And I see all the time parents who just give their kid their phone. They're trying to get them to quiet down or get them distracted because they're trying to watch or do something or have a conversation. And, these are our vulnerable population. That is right there.
So to reinforce that message you just said, the 6 foot male, the signal 1 to 2 inches into the head. With a 6 foot child, a 6-year-old child, it goes completely through their head.
Oh, my.
So we have the condition of thermal impact, right, which was the standard, but the biological impacts we know. Well, I'll give you an example. 1.6 watts is the standard transmission power of a cell phone, right? Well, 0.1 watts, 0.1, 15 times less the power level, can mutate a frontal lobe cell. Some science shows us that. So here you go. As you said, they're giving their child a cell phone and saying, go play with it. But it's fairly dangerous, particularly because there's no resistance. And the blood-brain barrier that sits there actually is impeded by RF signal from science. We know that there's mechanical breakdown of the membrane that's supposedly protecting the brain. And so it's even more potentially dangerous for a child that typically uses it for longer times of period. If they use it for 2 minutes a day, it's not a big deal. But that's not what's happening in the marketplace.
Right.
People are using it more and more.
Right.
And so, like, with you saying that, like, with this radiation and EMFs and, in our culture now and in our existence, we need more and more, like, stronger power, more Wi-Fi, more this, more that. And so there's the 5G has come out, and that was a big, big conversation around 5G. For our audience, can you tell us a little bit about 5G and how that has become imperative and harmful to not only us, but children? And
Yes, I can. Thank you for that question, because it's an important question for us to understand. With 5G and 6G, what we talk about is using technology that transmits at the lower level up to 10 gigahertz, right? So we know sort of a lot. A router is a 2.4, 4.8, 9.6. There's a range that we really understand the implications for. What's scary about 5G in the marketplace, or why there's concern, is because you're talking about a 20 gigahertz signal, a 90 gigahertz signal. So it's like 90 billion cycles per second. So it's all of a sudden so different, we don't know anything about it. And that's really the dilemma, is that you can't conclude anything about what you hear, only because we just don't have any scientific studies. However, I can tell you this. When you have exposures of RF, your gut is disrupted. And there's a DevC bacterium that tends to be in those who are electric hypersensitive. And what happens is the bugs in your stomach love the exposure. Well, it's also true that at 20 gigahertz, it loves the exposure. So there's a negative impact, obviously, for the mitochondrial and all the other functions the human body has that's governed by the stomach itself. So that's at 5G. We understand a lot of it, but then all of a sudden there's a bunch we don't, and that's what's scary, because there's a concern. The concern, actually, to be scientific, is in the power level. We talk about 1.6 watts per kilogram, right? That's the power that allows you to communicate. When you have higher, faster signals, you have to have much more power. So when we talk about a 5G at your front of your house, which is a small cell site, that has to transmit at over 40 watts to be able to get into your house. In other words, that can only go 750 feet at 40 watts. So all of a sudden, you're being exposed to much, much higher levels of energy at different frequency rates that the human body doesn't understand.
So that's like as Dabney and you both discussed before, it's all the cumulative. So if this, we don't have any answers, and we're adding this plus all the other, electronics we have in our home, that's just creating such a big thing for us that we're absorbing, right? And it's not
Sabrina, I love that way you characterize it, because I have an analogy for that. One bee can sting you and you won't die. 1,000 will. Right. Well, and that's what your point is. All of a sudden, your cell phone has 4 transmitters in it. It has a Wi-Fi, a Bluetooth, and a cell phone, and a GPS. So there's 4 transmitting signals from your cell phone. If you have 3 people in one room where they had cell phones, that's 12 transmitters. And all of a sudden, your room, your environment gets washed with all these signals, and there is a cumulative effect. It's a cumulative toxin, and it does have a greater effect.
Because everything is now almost Wi-Fi. You have your vacuums can be Wi-Fi. Then you have your ear pods. You have your wireless mics. You have your television routers. You have, anything and everything is almost Wi-Fi. And we think it's great. Oh, it's so, you can move it from here to here. But it's so true that we don't know what it's doing. Like most things in life, we are those people like, oh, let's try this and see what happens. Yeah. And then down the line, they're like, oh, well, that's what's causing that. We should stop that now. People are not like doing certain things that we were doing in the 70s, and changing the language and the story around it.
I'll give you a great example. I have my brother recently, in the past few years, he's an older guy. He put one of those ear things when he's talking on the cell phone, and he thinks it's great. And he started to get, his neck started hurting, getting worse and worse. He went to the doctor, and the doctor said, oh, we maybe got to put you on pills or something. We got to fix this. And I said, no, take the thing out of yourself, out of your ear. Within a day, it went away. And let's talk about that. When you have these things in your ears, it goes right through your head to communicate to stereo. For some systems, that's how they work. And remember, I said 0.1 watts per kilogram can mutate a cell, frontal lobe cell. Well, it's 0.1 power levels when you use Bluetooth. It's very low, but when you use it a lot, it becomes a cumulative impact to the human body.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about all the different things, and like I'm surrounded by it. Like I have Bluetooth in my car. I stream podcasts, I stream music. I have my laptop, my TV is a smart TV, my
Yeah,
phone, like
yeah.
iPad, it's everywhere. So how do we protect ourselves from this cumulative effect?
Turn the turn the bees off in the room. It's simple. Actually, so in general, it's all about removing the bees in the room. All you got to think about is, well, I can remove or I can move it away from me. When you have a cell phone to your head, that's when it's potentially the greatest impact to the cell. When you have it 4 foot away, 98% of the potential damage is gone. So distance is an incredibly important friend. I personally turn everything off. I don't have Bluetooth and Wi-Fi coming out of my cell phone. I want to talk on the phone. I don't want to talk to a Wi-Fi. So by turning all those off, you reduce those levels. I'm thinking of another thing we maybe want to share a little bit too. We've touched on it a little bit. If you're using a cell phone and you're a couple minutes a day, not long periods of time, you'll go on forever, and there'll be no impacts to you personally. But we have research that shows if you're a heavy user, hour or two a day, directly to the frontal lobe, that in 10 years, that accumulated use increases 3 times the probability of frontal lobe cancer.
Wow.
Yeah, so some studies show it's pretty significant. But knowing about it and reducing the number of exposures really does put you in a precautionary approach to the problem, which is actually very effective at minimizing any potential dangers to the human body.
Yeah, just keeping the cell phones away from you at nighttime, just putting them in
Yeah.
another room or across the room. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very easy to do. All
Mhm.
you got to do is think about where the sources are and how can I turn it off, or
Right,
how can I move it away?
right.
Like simple things like you have a router. You don't want your router in the bedroom.
No.
Why? Because it's transmitting, right? And in fact, let's talk about that a little bit. The sanctuary of the bedroom is important, as you know, for health. And when you have a combination of blue light potentially and RF signals in that room, it's disruptive. So let's talk about the blue light. Blue light is on the spectrum, as I said before. And that blue light goes into your eye. And guess what? You're not blinking because you're looking at a monitor. And so your eyes become dry and the macula starts getting impacted. And the, what is it? Cryptochrome protein in the back of the eye is the little switch that he has to turn on to get the not mitochondrial, but what's the melatonin to actually start generating. So when you're looking at a monitor and you're reading something and you want to go to bed, the switch didn't go off or turn on to get the body function to operate right. So you got a disruptive sleep at a starting point. And that's why if you want to be looking at monitors at night, about an hour or two before, put them aside. Let natural body. In other words, our bodies are used to at night going to sleep, and you're disrupting the natural function that the human body's done for many years, right? And then of course, You don't want your cell phones on your nightstands. I was on a podcast, and I was telling a very bright woman that, you want a sanctuary, so you have the circadian rhythm where you want it to be, and you don't want to disrupt that, because a cell phone, like the eye blue light, can interfere with the brain pattern. And it may be light and it's not much, but it's enough where if you're really electric hypersensitive, it can be pretty serious. So I said, you don't want any of this stuff in the room. And she said, oh, thank you so much I appreciate you helping, guiding us with this information. And about 2 weeks later, she said, I didn't believe a word you said. and she said, my husband and I took them out of the nightstand. We put them out. And she said, for the first time in a long time, they had a full night's sleep. So in her case, removing these stressors, because they're human body stressors, external environmental stressors that are changing the behavior of your body as a result of the exposure.
That's amazing.
And so by removing it, it helped them. It won't help everyone, but for those who are sensitive, it does.
Wow. And I work with women, and I don't know if you know, but Sabrina and I both are dental hygienists, and we go through a full health history every time a patient comes in, and over and over again I hear people, especially women, who say they don't sleep well. They have disrupted sleep. They wake up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, can't get back to sleep, and I wonder what their pattern is with using their phones at nighttime.
Exactly. Debney, what I didn't tell you about the statistics of electric hypersensitivity is, of the 20% that were in the studies that are now 50%, 80% are women. So science does not know why women are more sensitive to the RF signal than men. And so I'm not surprised at all. If you don't create that sanctuary and you're sleeping, it's not a good thing. It could be one source. In fact, there's some recent study by Dr. Navio. He's a physician as well as a biochemist, PhD biochemist, and he's doing some pretty exciting work, in my opinion. And what he does is he talks about the cell danger response. If you've listened to the stuff that I'm talking about, most people talk about it as oxidative stress, which is free radicals and antioxidants being balanced. But with Navio, he talks about the cell actually saying, I'm going to stop working on it. I'm not going to do this anymore because I'm under attack. And so the fight and flight natural response of the human body is reacting to the external stressor. And so you have to remove the stressor to go to sleep. It's literally that simple. Yeah.
It makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, and then there's those that feel that if they listen to music or a podcast before they put their ear pods in, they'll have their phone, they turn it on, put the timer on, and they feel that that's what gets them to sleep. But then you're right, halfway through the night, they're waking up and they're having such a disrupted sleep. And is it just because it's that effect of the EMFs after, like within the night? Or is it like, I, for example, read with a Kindle, like sometimes before bed, it gets me right to sleep. It's on the lowest light, like it's like an orange light. I don't know. It's like whatever. But I find that if I read a book, I'll stay awake because the light's so bright, it doesn't allow me to get to sleep. So then this Kindle, I fall asleep, but then I'm thinking, oh, my eyes are getting worse, or like, oh, maybe sometimes this is what's causing a headache. I don't know. Like, maybe, I don't know. This is only something that I've been thinking that's different from my regular routine, thinking that it was a good thing. And now I'm thinking maybe it's not such a good thing.
Well, I'll give you an example of one clinic with someone who was like hypersensitive. They were so impacted that they came into the clinic in a wheelchair.
Wow.
And there were so many body functions that were imbalanced that it took a long time for the clinics to try to bring that person back to recovery. So it can be fairly debilitating particularly if elevated levels are very high and prolonged. In this case, he was walking and his brain pattern was sleeping, and vice versa. So the electromagnetic hypersensitivity impact he had was actually changing brain pattern function. And that was something that they went after right at the very beginning. And it was directly related to the exposures he had. At least that clinic thought so.
Interesting.
Interesting.
So I'm curious, how did you get into this field? What made you so interested and curious about this?
Well, I was in Bell Labs years and years and years ago. And I actually I was in a team that evaluated technology and created the standards for those technologies. So I was fairly knowledgeable of the evolving telecommunications space. And about 20 years ago or so, my adult sons were working with a laptop on their lap, and it was going on for several hours at a time. And my wife, who's a social worker, said, "That can't be good for you. I want grandchildren. That can't be good for you." And I looked at her. I said, "No, the power levels are too small. What are you kidding me? That can't be true. That you can affect that. The power levels are too low." But then I said, wait a minute. I don't really know. Ironically, I was in the industry for years, and I didn't really know what science said. Well, science at that time knew after about 3 to 4 hours of fairly direct exposure, the male sperm is roughly 20 to 30% immobile. We knew that then, but no one else knew. I didn't know it. And so all of a sudden, I became more interested in understanding the link between the electronics that are entering into our lives and the impact it was having. So we had these silos of expertise not talking to each other. So no one knew what was going on. So that's actually drove me more towards understanding the medical side and seeing if there was real science that understood better than I did what was going on. And there was and is a plethora of science research that shows all body function potentially impacted. I was just thinking while I'm explaining it, Yale did a piece on pineal gland. They said if you have 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi signal and you have fluoride and a genetically mutated cell, it goes years and years, you have 3 times more likely to get cancer. So their research showed that a combination of events actually could lead to cancer, including RF signals. So we know a lot about the potential impact, and it is in conflict with those who provide services. It's not as apparent to them that there's a direct correlation between exposures, but there is science. Although about 6 years ago or so, the government did a study on epidemiology study, had very large populations of study animals, and they found a direct correlation between a 2.4 gigahertz and frontal lobe and heart cancer, believe it or not.
Wow.
So they're not people, and so it's hard. Some science suggests that you can't correlate it. I personally think so because it's been done like that for 50 years. You do epidemiology, and then that leads you to the human science, right?
Absolutely.
And so, yeah,
Absolutely.
that's the way I think it's valid. So,
wow. And as I think about how the industry of technology is moving so fast, like light speed fast, I keep thinking that it's just the power, the demand, the speed, it's going to just keep increasing.
Yeah, it is. By the way, in Europe, it's half the power level. So it's largely the US that considers the levels of power to be as high as they are. The rest of the world have varying degrees of power levels, some very, very low, most in between. So there is becoming worldwide recognition to the potential importance of those kinds of exposures and trying to limit them in science.
Yeah.
What are ways that we can protect ourselves from this besides besides avoiding? I know you said avoid, but are there other things to ensure that our health is okay, like in check? And is there anything we can do like other than avoid?
I mentioned, we talked about routers, for example.
Routers, right.
You don't need the router in the living room. You could have the router in the garage and you're going to still get service. But you're removing the level of power into your household,
right,
by a bunch. So simply putting it where it's into your living environment is one great way to reduce the exposures. Another is running wires from the router to your equipment so it doesn't use RF signals. And wiring it reduces a substantial amount of exposures. And again, with the router, turn it off at night. You don't need it on at night. You're not texting your girlfriends, right?
No, they're probably sleeping.
While you're sleeping, right? So you don't do that. And by simply turning it off. And I have a $10 timer, Christmas timer. Turn it on at 7, turn it off at 10.
Oh, that's smart. That's a good idea.
Simple things.
And I guess eating properly, always eating, like making sure, I guess, can protect you as well. Like, that's part of it as well, right? Like your antioxidants and foods can also help, not get rid of it, but also protect you.
Yeah. Now you're talking about resilience.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And actually, when I was talking about the circadian rhythm, when I was talking about the sanctuary in the bedroom, I was talking about mitochondrial recovery,
right?
Because you're disrupting circadian rhythms, and recovering from exposures is harder. We know that if you are eating properly, sleeping properly, exercising properly, actually you're far less impacted by exposures. Whereas if any of those falter a bit, it tends to be an exposure that's greater for you when you have those exposures.
Okay. Well, this has just been a wonderful conversation, Daniel. Really appreciate you taking us through what all this is about. And I can see your passion when you're talking about this. So what are maybe the top 3 things that you would like to leave our audience with?
I have one.
Okay.
You're the architect of your own destiny. And so if you think someone's going to come into your life and reduce the toxins and the exposures you have, you'll be long dead by the time they get there. So you really need to take control of your environment. And I'm sure that's what you coach with your patients as well. It's about what you can do. And if the standard is not quite right, you may want to know a little bit about that. You don't need to know much, but you actually can do something about it. You can minimize the exposures in your environment by turning things off, wiring things differently. And if you need shielding, which is also on the market, it provides further protection when you're putting it close to your body. So there's actually events and things you can do to minimize exposures. And as you were pointing out before, it's getting more and more important you do it because it's becoming more and more in our lives.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell the guys downstairs that are working with all their wireless devices, screwdrivers and all their drills. Like, I'm going to be like, you need to protect yourself if you're going to be using, never mind your eye goggles and your helmets. You need like protection from like the
EMFs.
EMFs that are going on. Right.
Yeah.
I also wanted just quickly to mention that you apparently wrote a book too. And so, if you want to read more and find out more about what's in this insightful conversation that Dan has brought to us, it's called Radiation Nation, but we'll have it in our show notes. And we're excited. I'm excited to read a little bit more about it. So,
yeah, well, actually, I was out of frustration. I realized that it wasn't public knowledge, yet there was so much information. And so what we did was we put a book together that showed what science knows, what the research, we spent a lot of time citing all the research that we understand, what the environments we live in, and things you can do to try to help minimize exposures to impact your health. And so I was frustrated because no one knew it. And so our goal became trying to help people understand it.
And I think it's great for you because, I tend to believe that if we don't see it, you don't really think about it. And so because we don't see what the immediate damage it's doing, we don't think about it. Much like skin cancer, as soon as you get, then you get it and you're like, oh, now I should have protected my skin where you might not have, right? And so I think this conversation will really have people thinking, especially now. And with, like you said, all the things that we have around us and surrounding us, it really strikes this conversation and makes it like more real for people to actually pay attention to everything. Because I know I'm like thinking, oh, that and that and that, and I'm going to pay more attention to how I use the Wi-Fi and shield myself. I mean, I eat pretty healthy, but I just want to make sure that I have a longevity in life.
And actually, you triggered an unrelated conversation, but I want to talk about it because Kennedy, currently leading our health, he actually brought the FCC to court about the standard, and said that the standard does not reflect current science. And he won.
Wow. Awesome.
Only a few years ago. Great. And it was about the standard only thinking about the biological impact, the thermal impact, not the biological. So people are becoming more and more aware of it, which I'm excited about because the more you know about it, the more you can plan on how you want to have it in your family.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect.
And I know I'm going to send this episode to all of my children who have my grandchildren. And I see them with their laptops and we do FaceTime and all the things. And it's like, oh, we need to protect these little guys and girls.
Exactly. Actually, moms, it's your job to make sure that your kids are safe. They don't know that. You have to.
Of course not. They just want to keep watching something that's going to keep moving and entertain them.
Right. Yeah. Or if you do, turn the Wi-Fi off and it's fine.
Yeah.
There's simple
download it and then let them watch it, I guess, right? It's the best way to do it.
Yeah, simple things. You really do minimize exposures. Like there was a woman that was putting her cell phone in the back of a what do you call it when you walk kids? A walker.
Stroller, yep.
Yeah, and I said, why are you doing that? Take it out. It's hitting the child's head. So all you do is take it and put it in your pocketbook and the child's safe. You're less safe, but your child's most safe.
Yeah.
Good advice.
Think about
great conversation.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. I appreciate chatting with you about this stuff because as you pointed out, I'm pretty excited about it.
Yeah, I can tell. Give us good information.
Well, thank you.
Thanks for joining us today at The Lifestyle Herbalist. If you're interested in how to protect your family from these toxins, check out the link in the show notes, DefenderShield, and save 10% off your order. Until next time, stay safe.